And I think it's a tremendously important topic that has a surprising number of hooks into the existing ALISE curriculum. My name is, as Alicia said, my name is John Burgess. I'm part-time faculty at the University of Alabama, and it's also where I got my PhD. And my background is in ethics. I'm an ethicist, and my dissertation was in virtue ethics. And I don't know if you know anything about virtue ethics, but it's Aristotelian, it's Greek, it's classical. It's about as, you know, if somebody thinks of sort of detached philosophical study, it's pretty much up there in the pantheon of detached philosophical study. And so when I engaged in ethical research, it was very much a mental exercise. You know, how to proceed with the good, how to how to flourish, and so all that changed. Engaging in ethics changed from an exercise of the mind to an exercise of the heart this past year for me, when I was fortunate enough to attend the Information Ethics Roundtable at the University of Alberta, where I listened to many wonderful people speak on the topic of information ethics. And this is this event is being sponsored by ALISE and for the Information Ethics SIG. So I got to listen to many people talk about information ethics, but one person in particular made a tremendous impact on me, a woman named Catherine Odora Hoppers. Have any of you read her work before or are familiar with her body of work? Yeah, she's unfortunately not as well known as I believe she deserves to be. Dr. Hoppers is at the University of Pretoria in South Africa, and is probably the leading advocate of cognitive justice today. And so her talk about how cognitive justice can be used to not just engage in reparations and seek a prescriptive, punitive solution to the years of apartheid and its effects on the cognitive status of the people of South Africa, but how genuine reconciliation can occur. And her conversation touched me in a way that I just didn't expect. And so after that, I've become something of an evangelist for the idea of cognitive justice and for the benefits that it can bring not only to the study of information ethics, but to many professional practices, including our own, including library and information studies. So these are the three topics that I'd like to go over with you today. It's a huge topic, and so we're only really going to be able to scratch the surface of it. But if you can walk away with three things today, these are the three things that I hope you leave with. I hope you leave with an understanding of what cognitive justice is, why it matters, especially why it matters to LIS educators and practitioners, and I'd like you to leave with some ideas of how and why it can be integrated into the LIS curriculum. Have any of you happened to have heard of cognitive justice before today? I always like to see Jenny has, and I know at least one opportunity for her to heard about it. Yeah, it's still a fairly insular topic. Kate, that's great. I'm glad. I'm happy to get any contributions that you know about the subject, either in the course of the conversation, or I'm planning on leaving about 15 to 20 minutes at the end of it for questions and hopefully for discussion. would be very interested to see people's thoughts and your responses. So for those of you who don't know what cognitive justice is, I'd like to give a brief summary of it to begin with. It's a discipline within information ethics that is said to be normative. It's a normative approach. And all a normative ethic is that it is an ethical system that believes there is a right way to behave. There is a norm to which we want to aspire. And so for cognitive justice, that norm is that every individual and indeed every culture has the I'm going to use the language of rights to begin with before I back away from that, but has the right to autonomy and to autonomously determine what is valuable knowledge, what is justified true belief, and what is beneficial from their own cultural perspective. So the norm in this case is the right of individuals to and their cultures to determine what is truly valuable knowledge. And the justice part of that is that that when it is impaired is indeed not just an abridgment, is not just a transaction, but is a full injustice. And so in addition to being a normative approach within information ethics, it's also a social movement. It's a social movement in that people are, just as individuals are engaged in social justice to try to reform social practices in a way that it's more egalitarian and more fair and more just, cognitive justice is a social movement that's trying to engage in liberative practices to allow individuals within their cultures to determine their own cognitive identities. So, all right. So, what is this injustice that is needing to be overcome? The problem of the abridgment of cognitive autonomy is really centered around the actions of the European colonial empires and the work that they did throughout the 19th and 20th centuries and the legacy that still lingers today from colonialism. We all, I believe, are familiar with the legacy that colonialism brought to the economic, political, and cultural landscapes of Latin America, Africa, Asia, and indeed North America. And so we're well armed with the knowledge of the damage done by colonialism to economic and political institutions and to the infrastructures that propped up those political and economical systems. But what we might not be aware of is the legacy of colonialism on shaping the way entire cultures see the world. It is the philosophical word for it is epistemology. I'm going to try not to use philosophical terms needlessly, but it's really just the problem of justified true belief, how we know the things we know, and indeed how we know the things we know are good. So these colonial powers intentionally exported the idea that certain ways of thinking were normal and good and progressive and healthy, and that others are backwards, primitive, peripheral, and should be minimized. And so some of this was done explicitly, and some of this was done implicitly. And we see today very much the legacy of that system still when we talk about the developed world versus the developing world, when we talk about ours being a information society or an information age, when we're talking about the explicit benefits of engaging in a scientific and industrial revolution, leading to the inevitability of progress. And so this dialogue of inevitable progress, this idea that that in order to be fully human, not only does one have to be engaged in consumerism of electronic communication materials, but also you have to be a consumer of westernized notions of what the future looks like, of accounts of what history is. Essentially, you are receiving an entire frame of thought that someone else created that has absolutely no relation to the historical cultural narrative that was and is every bit as valid and justified as those of European cultures. And so the this problem, this rhetoric of the developed versus the developing world is exacerbated to this day by international monetary lending organizations, which as criteria for providing loans often have metrics in place that require individuals in these countries to adopt certain levels of infrastructure development, certain quantified standards that might seem completely natural to a person who's absorbed the Western cognitive mind frame, but are not native, are not at all in keeping with what individuals in that culture would be doing if they were left to make their own local decisions. So to summarize, colonialism, even as it receded, left by this legacy of establishing an ethical definition of what the good is and a philosophical and conceptual definition of how one should best live one's life. And individuals engaging in cognitive justice seek to first frame that discussion in a way that it's revealed. You reveal that the legacy is in place, but at the same time promote the autonomy and authority to reject those narratives and recover their own narratives. So one of the first questions that I had when I first encountered cognitive justice was the question, okay, that's a good idea. I can't argue with people's right to establish their own narratives and to determine how they should frame questions of meaning and justify true belief in the world. But does that mean that we have to reject scientific methodology? I'm a big fan of the scientific method. I look at all the truly beneficial things that the scientific method has brought to us, the ability to create incremental knowledge that's transmitted forward generation after generation, and how knowledge can be refined through testing and revision, and how all of knowledge is provisional. These are beautiful things. These are just gorgeous ideas. And so, is opening this up, this conversation, this broadening of authority, is this some kind of rejection of the benefit or utility of the scientific methodology? And the answer is no, it's not. Catherine Ordora Hoppers is an educator and a chemist, and she knows very well the benefits of scientific methodology and would never seek to debunk its usefulness. But there is the idea that science is a method. Science is not necessarily a full, robust epistemology. What we contrast science with, and I'll probably return to some of these concepts in a minute, but what we contrast science with is scientism. Scientism is a value-laden narrative that is grafted onto the scientific method. It is grafting concepts of progress. It's grafting knowledge, concepts of the fact that anything that cannot be explicitly quantified is less valuable. We see these same struggles between disciplines that focus on the hard sciences versus social sciences and versus the humanities. This is a wide-ranging conversation, but it's one thing when it's just a question of disciplinary boundaries and the relative validity of disciplines. It's another thing when somebody is saying that your entire way of seeing the world is less valid because it does not embrace atomized, reductive scientism as the defining narrative of what reality truly is. And so we'll go back a screen. Basically, in contrast with the narrative of scientism as being a strict, this is the only way of seeing the world. It's sort of the objectivist equivalent of philosophy. The selfishness is the only truly valuable position. Instead, instead of saying that science has no value, adherents of cognitive justice want to instead promote an ecological approach. And this ecological approach is that it is perfectly valid to have multiple ways of seeing the world. That in fact, not only is it valid, it is potentially very fruitful. And so one individual can see the fundamental unit of the universe as being materialistic atomism. Another person can see the fundamental unit of the universe as being narrative, story. And as long as your worldview matches up in a useful way with evidence, then it is, not only is it beneficial to have multiple ways of explaining that evidence, it actually enriches the process of doing science. So that's the first ecological sense, that it is not a competitive process, that instead it's a process of promoting the maximum diversity of ideas. When we think about ecological catastrophe, the thing that dooms us all is monoculture. If we have only one means of dealing with any problem, and all of a sudden our means of dealing with that problem is no longer effective, then we're not able, a species is not able to propagate. But instead, if a species, or if multiple species in an ecosystem, each have different ways of approaching problems as they crop up, then it's more likely that that species that does have the ability to adapt will proceed. Now, that makes it seem like more of a competitive thing than it is. I don't want to focus on survival of the fittest, so it's either my worldview or your worldview, and only one will survive. Instead, it's promoting diversity of ideas within a single species. So metaphorically here, one might learn to climb higher, one might learn to run faster. So basically, within the same species, diversity of capability allows us to adapt to threats and challenges, and adaptable and more adaptable, sufficient species. So in the second, also in the sense that One of the main problems of colonialism is the fact that colonial powers would come and do still come and harvest local knowledge of botanical plants, harvest culture, music, art, and appropriate them for their own needs. And so the idea is that if you extract that out from its ecological surroundings, then that knowledge is truncated. It withers and dies without its context. So rather than be a system which goes in and harvests knowledge, promoting cognitive justice allows us to keep that ecology of understanding in place, and we can deal with the entire, we can interact with the entire ecology so that we get the fullest and richest and most rewarding understanding of any cultural or scientific knowledge that is produced by any culture. So we're probably going to skip through a fair amount of this. This is basically just saying that the other good thing about it is that it allows us to de-reify knowledge. It allows us to make sure that the knowledge extracted or potentially extracted from these cultures is not guarded and kept out of circulation and gets instead kept in the living process. So by promoting how is created to determine how I strongly encourage all of you to read it. It's oh no, are you here? You're back. Is that any better, or is it still feedbacky? Still better? Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes. How about this? Any better, or still feedbacky? Excellent. Yeah, my students call that my Voldemort voice or my demon voice. I'm afraid it only happens when I get really passionate about a subject, and so I have to try to keep it a little bit mellow. But anyway, so yeah, I strongly encourage you to take the time to read The Search for Cognitive Justice. It's very short. It's maybe 4 or 5 pages, and it does a really good job of encapsulating the core concepts. And these are additional individuals associated with it, and this edited volume just came out, and it gives a nice glimpse into how the discipline is beginning to spread out into interdisciplinary and other academic and scholarly tracks. So specifically, what are the points of contact between LIS education and cognitive justice practice? Well, the point that I would like to begin is showing how the standards for accreditation allow for this type of thinking, and in fact encourage the inclusion of cognitive justice practice in LIS. And so the ones that I have highlighted blue are particularly fertile grounds for overlap for justifying the inclusion of cognitive justice. I want to try to wrap up in about 15 minutes. So the main ones are clearly the philosophy and principles and ethics of the field, and I would argue the advancement of the field's knowledge base, even though that deals with specifically doing LIS research to advance the field's knowledge base. It also emphasizes the way we conduct research and why we do it, and so understanding why we should provide autonomy to LIS practitioners around the world to think and conduct LIS research in a way that makes sense to them, I think should be part of the curriculum, or is a very easy way to hook it in. Roman numeral 126, I think, is probably the most clear point of contact, information services in a diverse global society. If we take that idea seriously, then it's not just about propagating the way we believe that the world's information should be organized and bringing that as a gift to a diverse global society. Instead, it's encouraging a diverse global society to communicate to us the way that they think about how information should be organized and the best possible ways to make sense of all the knowledge that their cultures have accumulated for hundreds of years, sometimes textually, but sometimes orally. And so including the role of serving the needs of underserved groups, well, absolutely. You can build the most fabulous Western-style library, and if no one seeks information in the way that we're presenting it, then we're creating an underserved group, despite our best efforts. And again, this is not meant to be an attempt to do the right thing. It's the idea of thinking, boy, we're putting all this effort into serving people to begin with. Isn't it better if we reduce the friction? Isn't it better to let people tell us? And of course we do this, but cognitive justice gives us a specific framework for thinking about why it might necessarily be an easy translation. The legacies and the realities of colonization are real, pervasive, and malignant. And so simply showing up and wanting to serve is not sufficient. There has to be healing. This is a healing endeavor, and so it begins with listening, but it also it has to extend through promoting local autonomy. And so besides the learning outcomes, the next obvious hook is through the statements of what the curriculum should include. Again, the items in blue highlighting are the ones that I believe are most relevant, although others probably are also important and useful means of justifying the inclusion of cognitive justice. I believe that being an effective leader involves the ability to listen to those that you lead. So I mean that you inflict a vision on others. It's an opportunity to help the vision of others come to fruition using your skills and your unique abilities. Obviously, Roman numeral 2.4 is again very much on point, and it provides direction for future development of a rapidly changing field. The world is changing, and the rhetoric of developed and developing is extraordinarily problematical, but so many people have bought into the idea that there is this this direction to history, there is this thrust to history, and so the world is changing and developing and modifying, and so if we want to see egalitarian principles, if we want to see autonomy, incorporated in these many changes, then we have to take action. We have to be the individuals who are knowledgeable of this problem and act to make sure that as the technologies are put in place, that they allow for greater and greater representation, greater and greater feedback in a meaningful way. And so the specific fertile grounds that I see within the standard ALISE curriculum where we can begin talking about cognitive justice very easily. The first thing I would like to say is I don't think that we should tuck this away in its own course. I don't think it needs to be a boutique course on cognitive justice that people can take or not as they see fit. I think that it would be much more beneficial to weave it throughout existing courses in the same way that we weave social justice and social responsibilities material. And so it's really just a matter of not doing something but making sure that as we are already doing the things that we do to try to teach our students to be people who make our communities of practice and communities of service better in socially responsible ways, that we bring this idea that not only can society bear the scars of social, economic, and legal injustices, but that people, generation after generation, can bear cognitive burdens due to injustice. And it's not, I know that I've been discussing apartheid and discussing Latin America and Africa, but clearly, obviously, this sort of thing is an American problem as well. Cognitive justice runs deep in this country, and forgive me for being an America-centric, U.S.-centric. I'm an American. It's where I practice. It's where my mind is. But it's clearly a United States problem as well. And so, fertile areas that I believe we can weave this into the curriculum are collection development and management. Make sure that collection and development policies are clearly rooted in developing things that communities actually need. One of the things that Dr. Hoppers spoke about was developing library curricula for the sciences that were very practically oriented, that were very pragmatically oriented, not because she didn't value theory of chemistry theory or theoretical physics, but because in order to get people to begin using the materials, you have to reach them where they are. And if you do things on water reclamation and soil fertility, whatever is truly meaningful, and then organize them in a way that makes sense with local agricultural practices, then your collection is going to get used more often. Obviously, we all know that our classification schemes are Eurocentric or born out of the Enlightenment, and bear the skeletal structure of Enlightenment thought. It's too much to ask for us as educators to overturn the way that classification, that existing classification has been done. You can't change mesh headings and things like that, but what you can do is emphasize the value of folksonomy and emphasize the utility of tagging and how these sort of para-classification schema, they aren't peripheral, they're not secondary, they're a chance to get things right. Instead of just being something grafted on, they can be a point of real justice. Obviously, information policy, decisions, how to utilize money, what it means to potentially to only have access to collections rather than purchasing things which can be relied upon for many years. Anyway, you can see the list. I don't just want to read it all off to you, but I think that there are also a lot of really fertile points of connection with our introductory courses as well. When we start talking about questions of the purpose and identity of the profession, when we start talking about exactly how it is we serve and what good we seek to do, a lot of times we'll talk about what our contributions to a democratic society are, and how as whole life educators we can bring we can enrich the community, but unless we are also aware that we have the opportunity to heal generational wounds, that part of the job of informing people is also informing them of their right to make demands for information that makes sense to them. It's a very much a system of liberation and empowerment as well that I think fits very nicely into our discussions of theories of ALISE practice and the purpose and identity of the profession. And we don't really have too much time to go over it, but I think that social epistemology, I'm a philosopher, I think in terms of, I think that there's a very natural fit between Egan and Scher's concepts of social epistemology and the things that are accomplished through cognitive justice. But really, that's just too high level. I love it. I'm going to continue working on it. But honestly, I think that just focusing on the healing aspects of cognitive justice, the fact that that we recognize wounds done to society by individuals trying to enforce, or by institutions trying to enforce a single view of what the good is in the world that's entirely culturally determined. We recognize that. We can propagate that idea among our students and then help them liberate other individuals, give them the voice to think about what is meaningful for them and how to recapture ways of thinking that might otherwise have been abridged, not just for themselves, but really for the good of all of us. The more diversity of ways of thinking that we can propagate in the world, the richer our lives will be, the better our cultural experiences will be, the more just a world we've created, and the better we'll be at facing the not inconsiderable problems that we've made for ourselves as we roll on through our century. So that was the substance of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to it, and I'm happy to take the last 15 or so minutes for questions or conversation. Thank you. I'm reading your comment now, Clara.
John, this is okay. Great. So my question was mainly using it as a meta framework. So in addition to focusing on subject content such as curriculum, as an approach for us to the way that we teach. And then if you say that yes, that you think that this would be a positive approach, then what's the argument for faculty who think like this is just too much work?
I think that it is a lot of work, and that same faculty have probably said the same thing about incorporating cognitive, social justice and social responsibilities into the curricula. So what I would say is that we've already baked it into the cake. Many, as we saw in the learning objectives and the curriculum, those things are already in there. So it's not a matter of adding more social justice work or more material. Although actually, let me pull back, because you're saying that that's too much work for, not for educators, but too much work for practitioners. Is that right? I should have clarified your question first.
No, it's for, well, I was asking about educators, that if, this is something that we all agree on, at least, I think you've got a captive audience here. How about our colleagues? What would be the rationale for them? Or how could we make it easier for them?
I see. So for people who weren't inherently engaged in the social justice project, for them, I would say, first of all, that not everyone has to be engaged with it. I don't think that just as not everyone is on board the theory that that all librarians have to learn how to code. Not all librarians have to be social justice advocates. So what I would say is that we're a large discipline, and there is room for other for a multiplicity of approaches. But for those who are at least a little intrigued, I would like to develop and strengthen the argument of the benefits of cognitive justice for adaptability. I think that we're all invested in the propagation of the species. We're all invested in being able to thrive as cultures, as individuals, and as a species. And if it can be made persuasive that doing this actually does increase our adaptability, then I think that's a kind of a high-level argument, but it may be persuasive. It's how I would attack it anyway. What about other people? Those of you who've maybe heard about cognitive justice and thought of it before, what seems like a good way of attacking that?
Well, it looks like Karen typed up a couple of questions for you.
And while you're reading Karen's questions, which are great ones, the reason I asked is that, I'm in full agreement with you, and it's kind of some of the work that we've all done in terms of trying to advance diversity and inclusion. There is a lot of agreement that that's what we should be doing, but when it comes to actual practice, then it's not as evident.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not as evident. I definitely think that that it needs to be sort of conversationally disseminated first before there's more of a chance to actually get it incorporated and get more people on board with it. For Karen's question, I think that the question about the corporate university context is a really one that's ripe for further research. I know that it's not in the language of cognitive justice, but I know that Wayne Wiegand and John Bushman both speak a lot about the neoliberal approach, and Tony Samek write a lot about neoliberalism and its effects on the educational system, and how education, and specifically LIS education, can be in opposition to that. So I don't know of anything specifically about cognitive justice and the neoliberal approach to the corporatization of the university, but I think it would be an article I would love to read, and I guess I should probably write it then if I want to read it so bad. Did that answer your question, Karen, or? You should help me write it.
I think
Nice.
he's taking you up on it.
The battle is joined. I'm afraid that I probably never answered your question very well, Clara, but I need to think about it and compose my thoughts, and I'll try to answer you better.
Oh no, I think you've addressed it, and especially tying it to your response to Karen's questions. And related to that, then my other thought had to do with, how as librarians we recognize some knowledge to be more privileged than others. And I'm just thinking of research that it's in an area that I'm interested in, which is Asians in Latin America. And a lot of the researchers in this field are from the Western world. And so if anything is done by Latin Americanists themselves, it tends to be work that's descriptive and in Spanish and in non-peer-reviewed channels. So therefore, it's not given the same kind of respect. And so how do we ensure that all those voices are included in, the collections of our universities, and so all students have access to the variety of research and other kinds of knowledge out there?
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. One of the things that I probably should have lingered on longer was the opportunity for that institutional repositories can play in cognitive justice. The right for local institutions to establish what is meaningful, what is authoritative, and what is valuable gives them the right to collect and disseminate those sort of things that might not have filtered through the peer review system, but are inherently seen as useful because they're coming from people with distinct and influential voices. So I think working on changing the way institutional repository, yeah, exactly. Changing the way that we think about the purpose and function, not just aggregative, but also in a justice context would be a good way of handling that. And Sergio, I'm with you. I believe that it is so important to incorporate theory and history and philosophy into basically to address the question why. I think we spend a whole lot of time talking about how, and we're great at telling how, and how is extraordinarily valuable. But in addition to how, that question why gets us. Yeah, I think they probably are. I think they probably are. We just have to afford ourselves space to do it, and right now we're being told that the economic realities prevent that, and we'll see. That's certainly something we all have to get together and consider. What are our real priorities? What's the real question? And the realities of tenure. For sure, Jenny, for sure. Any other questions? Oh, let's see, Julie has one. Yeah, it's something that I skipped over a little bit, Julie, but oh yeah, informal communication as well. That's very interesting. That one thing is the rejection of rights-based discussions. The fact that that we tend to focus on, yeah, exactly, underserved group. It's it's weird, but just the idea of developing. My goodness, can you think of a more pejorative term? It's like, so we're where we're supposed to, we're where everyone is supposed to be, and maybe someday you'll get there. And yeah, underserved puts the onus on us. But one linguistic term that I think is really fascinating, and I wish I had been able to talk about a little bit more, is the fact that many people engage in cognitive justice work reject the language of rights-based ethics, of specifically human rights-based ethics, because we in the West tend to be obsessed with the idea that that human rights are the way of establishing an equal floor for everyone. You know, that this is something that we can all expect just on the basis of being human. But since so many people are actually denied those rights, so many people don't have freedom of assembly, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom from persecution for religion, et cetera, that by extension makes them less human. I mean, it makes them, if I don't have these rights, then I am not fully human. So just the language that we use to describe, you know, what is just and what is unjust can actually itself be implicitly unjust. And so, yeah, we definitely can review the language that we use to describe the way that we serve the people that we're supposed to represent. Sergio, you said you had another question? Sure. All action has to take place locally. So I am not despaired at all. There are so many wonderful people who are genuinely compassionate and you know, do this work because they're interested in the subject matter, but because they love people, and they want to improve the living conditions of as many people as they can. And so, sure, we have standards and benchmarks and measurables and outcomes and all those good things. That those are the realities, but as long as we realize that these are the cognitive structures that are being labeled upon us, and we don't have to, you know, we have to work with them because they represent this, you know, the strong force in the area, but we don't have to internalize them. And by choosing not to internalize those structures, and by doing everything that we can to subvert, there you go, brilliant. Very, very good. I really wish I had mentioned free air. Yeah, basically they're the person in the room with a gun, and you have to pay attention to them. But you don't have to adopt that. You don't have to accept that as the right way to think. It's not the good. You have the right to determine what the good is for you. So small. We all have to do it in tiny ways, and then hope that there's a critical mass reached. You know, it's a terrible thing to have to sit and hope, but you know, I defy somebody to take it away from me. Thank you, Karen.
So we have a couple of more minutes
before
we have to wrap up. If anyone had any other questions for John at this moment?
Well, Clara, I'm actually writing a paper on cognitive justice and social epistemology, and that's where I'm taking this next. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. I will post a link to it on my Twitter account, which is right here. Oh yeah, it's yeah, it's very likely that the more fluid communication becomes, the more, you know, the barriers are reduced, the more information wants to be cheap, the more we're going to start seeing people insist on seeing the world in the way that makes sense to them, and you know, all these messaging platforms. Oh my goodness, yeah, that's right. Roaming llamas. If somebody can put an ambiguously colored dress on a llama, I think we would rule the world.
Well, everyone, I unfortunately have to wrap this up because we have hit our hour for the webinar. I do want to thank everyone that participated today. Also, we are recording this webinar, so it will be posted on the ALISE website early next week. So if you want to see it again or share it with others, you'll have an opportunity to do so then. John, thank you for such a great webinar today. I definitely learned a lot being here in the ALISE office about what you're doing and also with cognitive justice. So thank you so much for putting this together and presenting it as part of ALISE Xchange.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for coming. This was tremendously enjoyable, and I hope to talk to you and work with you all again in the future.
Okay, everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, John.